and mission in the Asia-Pacific a top priority.
I've made restoring American engagement in this region a top priority.
Not only our security in the Asia-Pacific region, but also for the region as a whole.
America's expansion in the Asia-Pacific is indeed a top priority. The State Department even outlines its mission plan on its own website. The to-do list: to expand economically and reap benefits, promote democracy, good governance, and of course, human rights. But here's the most interesting part: ensuring military presence, which will support America's engagements in the region. Well, we all know what the U.S. has been engaged in around the world lately. Take Afghanistan, for instance. But speaking about U.S. presence in Asia-Pacific exclusively, there are 200 U.S. battleships there, more than 1,000 fighter jets all across the area, and more than 300,000 military personnel. And further expansion is on the cards as the first drone fleet was deployed to Japan, while South Korea may be hosting a U.S. anti-missile defense system in the near future. Joining us in the now is James Corbett of the Corbett Report from Osaka, Japan. James, what is the potential threat here? Why does the U.S. need AMDs and drones in the Asia-Pacific region?
Well, the potential threat, at least as far as the United States is portraying it, for example, in Secretary of Defense Hagel's recent remarks at the Asia Defense Forum, is that China is now becoming a destabilizing presence in the South China Sea specifically, where Hagel specifically mentioned some of the territorial disputes that China has been having with some of its neighbors, including the Philippines, and perhaps most notably right now, Vietnam. So I think the United States is attempting to portray China's recent moves, specifically in the South China Sea, and of course also in the East China Sea, where it has territorial disputes with Japan, as a growing menace and potentially one of military and naval importance, which justifies, at least in the eyes of the Pentagon, the increasing military deployment in the region.
What response do you expect from China to this? Is it really bothered by this expansion? It must be.
Well, I think it would be right to be bothered by the expansion. I mean, just to put into context some of the recent the moves that have been made on the U.S. side, for example, we've seen, for example, Northrop Grumman sign a $1.2 billion contract to supply Global's Hawk spy drones to South Korea back in December of 2012. Just earlier this year, Australia signed a $12 billion contract with Lockheed Martin to supply F-35 fighter jets. South Korea just concluded its own negotiations with Lockheed Martin for a $6.8 billion contract for F-35 fighter jets. We had 2 additional ballistic missile defense ships are headed to Japan to go in line with the extra missile defense radar system that's being slotted into Japan. We have the possibility being floated of a THAAD missile defense system being situated directly in South Korea. That would be a first. We had Hagel recently touting some sales of Apache helicopters to Indonesia. We recently had, for example, the United States signing a 10-year agreement to expand its military presence in the Philippines. There are a lot of signs that should be worrying to China in all of that. And on the flip side of it, China certainly has been showing more of its naval presence in the South China Sea area, putting in an oil rig directly in disputed waters that Vietnam claims as part of its own economic exclusion zone. So I think we see definitely some brinksmanship happening on both sides right now.
But the U.S. says that it's to enhance regional security.
That's right. Well, this is the way that they would like to frame it at any rate. And so I guess the vision of regional security that's being propounded here is basically the status quo, in which the United States is really the undisputed regional power and the arbiter of disputes. And I think that that's the type of vision that we're seeing being slotted into place with all of these agreements that are coming about as a result of the recent tensions. And we see this even in some alliances that may be surprising, some ideas that are being talked about that were unthinkable before all of this. For example, even in Vietnam, the disused naval site at Cam Ranh Bay is now being talked about as a potential site for a future U.S. naval contingent, and that would make sense based on the recent type of instability that Vietnam's been having with China. So again, all of this justifies some sort of regional security, but it's a question of whose vision. And interestingly enough, at the this recent Asia Defense Forum where Hagel was speaking, President Xi Jinping's representative, a secretary, a deputy of the PLA army, came out with to forward a vision of a Chinese idea for Asian cooperation in security matters, talking in vague terms about comprehensive, cooperative, sustainable security. So China actually did forward its own competing vision of regional security at that forum, but that was almost completely drowned out in